Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by Matt Brunkie of the Yipps Baseball Podcast. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a pretty good baseball season so far. Before we start talking about the MLB season, and of course before we talk about the playoffs, because that's going to be starting very soon. If you want to talk more about your podcast, how long you've been doing it, pretty much all that good stuff.
Yeah, me and my friend Aaron Furman, who is MIA on this right here, but no, yeah, we were pretty bored during COVID. It was a product of quarantine for sure, but we've always talked about it, like, you know, even when we were younger, how we wanted to do something, or our parents telling us like you guys never stop arguing sports, you should have a radio show. Well, now, like, what does any 20-year-old something kid do? Naturally, when you're bored, you start a podcast. So we were like, oh yeah, like, let's do that. And then it just we were like, okay, like, how could we make it interesting? And we were like, could we do all sports, or should we do baseball? And we both love baseball. We both know it better than anything. So we're like, okay, let's talk about that. And then it kind of just grew into us, you know, having enough, I don't know if you want to say connections, but enough friends that kind of were playing minor league baseball, where we decided, like, hey, like, we should feature a player on our show. And that's kind of like what we like pride ourselves on doing, is through the first, you know, we've been doing it for about a year now, a little over about a year. It was a year in May. I think the big thing that for us is, like, we really enjoy having the players on is because, like, we're not super serious about the game on our show. We, like, if anyone's ever listened to it, it's like we do put out like serious takes, but we're very like lighthearted in what we're talking about. And when we do like the interviews, we're talking about, you know, we're not talking about launch angles and like swing mechanics and stuff like that. Like, we're talking about like what these guys like to do off off the field, like what their handicap in golf is, like what, you know, like different stuff like that. We try to bring the person out of the player, and I think we do a pretty good job of that, just because, to me, like, that's what I find the most interesting. And I think, like, it helps you kind of relate to the player too, because everybody just looks at them as like, oh, we pay to go see them, you know. And especially with social media nowadays, you do anything wrong and you're just ripping into these guys left, you know. People are all over the place. So I don't know, we felt like it was important that we could kind of be a platform for like, you know, minor leaguers, major leaguers, whoever it is, to come on, and we just take the baseball out of them, and we kind of show a little bit more of who they are, and people can get a sense of like their personal side as opposed to just being an athlete. So that's what we like to do, and I think we do a pretty good job. I'm a little biased, though, I may say.
Yeah, that's really cool. You know, you have some connections in the minor league, and you know, you mentioned too, you started the podcast back in last May, right during kind of the pandemic, and we actually started too in March, I think, but we weren't, you know, through YouTube, and it was just audio. And then I think in October of last year we started with the YouTube, and that's grown tremendously as well. So yeah, but I think, you know, talking to a lot of podcasters and interviewing them and stuff, it seems like a lot of people, I would probably say probably at least half the podcast, like, I don't know if it'd be 50%, but a lot of the podcasts now came from the pandemic. Like, it seems like it seems like everybody now has a podcast, and most of them started during the pandemic, right when there wasn't much going on. So it is interesting how that worked out, and you know, podcasts are really big now. So, but it's really cool to learn about yours. So let's jump into the baseball season so far, and of course, I mean, the big story right now is how good the Giants have had this year, and of course the Dodgers are right behind it, but it seems like they're not going to quite catch them. I think the Giants are going to hold on and win that NL West. But what have you thought about the Giants season so far?
So before the season, we actually did it was like a live show on this app. It was called Locker Room app, and now I think Spotify bought it, which we really missed the boat on that one. But it's called like Spotify Green Room or something like that. And we would do a live show every Tuesday where we would do like Team Highlight Tuesday, and we'd pick a team from, I don't know, the AL West and the NL West. And I remember, and Fur and I have talked about this on our show a couple times. Like, the big thing that when we came to the Giants was, I did not, to clarify, I did not think they were going to do what they were doing. Okay, so I'm not taking an easy way out. However, one of the main things that I said, I was like, you know, I thought this was going to be a 2-horse race, but I said, in the years to come, I was like, whether it's next year or like everyone thinks the Dodgers and the Padres have this competitive window now for like 5 years where it's just going to be them two winning the division over and over. I was like, when the Giants pop up out of nowhere and win the division and make a playoff run, and that's just what they do because that's just the organization they are, I'm like, I will be the first one to not be surprised. And then lo and behold, they go out this year and they, first team to win 90 games. They went one of the first teams to clinch the division. And, it's just crazy because they're, as a franchise, they just do so many things right. And when they have lows, they have their lows, but you have to take into account, like, they won 3 World Series in 5 years. They dominated the early part of the 2010s. There's to have a 5-year stretch like that. And then in 2016, they were back in the playoffs. They just happened to run into maybe the greatest baseball team of all time, my 2016 Chicago Cubs. So, it's one of those things where they are a well-run organization. They're also getting career years. I shouldn't say career years, but they're getting resurgent years out of a lot of these older veteran players that I've knocked them for just eating salary on, like, your Johnny Cuetos, your Evan Longorias, your Buster Posies, who's been a pillar of that organization for a long time. But yeah, I don't think anybody expected it, but it's fun to see. And the fact that they went out and made a move for a guy like Chris Bryant and some other smaller moves for, Kevin Gausman was a slept on move when they got him from Baltimore a couple of years ago. I think that's one of those things where, like, they always try to stay competitive and they do it really well. So I was surprised that it was this year, but I was expecting it to be within like the next 2 or 3 years that they were just going to randomly be good. And then I was going to be like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. The Giants are about to be good again. They're going to rattle off another 5-year stretch where they're just dominant. So, but yeah, very surprising. I did not expect them to be this good this fast.
Yeah, me either. And I thought the same way. I thought the Dodgers and Padres were going to be the teams in the NL. I think most baseball fans did. But the Giants are kind of an interesting team because it was like every other year they'd win the World Series. They won in 2010. They won in 2012. They won in 2014. And then they got really quiet there for a little bit. And I kind of forgot about them making the postseason in 2016. But the Giants had, of course, Buster Posey having the season he's had. And they made some great moves like Chris Bryant in the trade deadline. So, I mean, I think they're most likely going to make the World Series, but with how hot my Cardinals have been, I'm very we might have a chance, and we seem to rally in September. But before we start talking about the Cardinals, I want to talk more about the unraveling of the Padres. They have just completely gone from a team possibly to make the World Series to a team that's probably not even going to make the playoffs. And of course, recently Manny Machado and Fernando Tatis got into it. But what have you thought about the Padres just unraveling?
So for me, it's interesting because when you look at the Padres, like, they're one of those, it's always tough, especially in a game of baseball where, it's like in the NBA, we've seen it, like when the Heat, their first year, they just didn't, like, they were all friends, obviously, but to play competitively at the highest level, you need some sort of chemistry, right? Like, you have to gel. And you've seen it, occasionally with these other quote unquote super teams. And I think the Padres were really just trying to gear up and get as much talent as they possibly could to put it on the field and compete with the Dodgers. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I respect the hell out of it. I thoroughly enjoy watching them go for it. But I think, like, this team is going to be, if they would have done this last year, and I know it was only 60 games, but coming into this year, they would have been better off. Like, I think next year, I think if this team relatively stays the same, of course they're going to add somebody. I think Adam Frazier, who they got at the deadline, still under team control for another year, which is crazy because he's like 30 years old already. Like, one of those type of deals where they just, now they have so much talent, and it's always a great problem to have so much talent because you see Tatis in right field. I mean, that's how much infield talent they have. But I think part of the unraveling is because it's so hard, to have that much talent and keep them all healthy, and B, when they're on the field, you have to have that chemistry. I don't think the Manny Machado Fernando Tatis thing is as big as everyone's making it out to be, because I feel like I feel like they're super close, and I feel like Machado, is a veteran. Tatis could definitely learn some things from Machado just from being in the league for so long. Machado's done it, forever. But I think it's more of like a brother situation where he was basically trying, like, sometimes you got to be checked. Like, you heard him in that told him, he's like, you're the best player in baseball. Like, he said some other words in there, but he's like, go be that, go be the best. Like, stop talking, don't worry about it, and go be the best. So I think, he just needed to be checked in that moment. And then after that, it's kind of over with. And I think, Machado at some points in his moments that he's had in his career, he could use that too. And maybe he didn't have that, earlier on so now he's doing that to a Tatis who, if you look at the arc of careers realistically, like Manny Machado was young, he was flashy, gets a big deal. Tatis is young, the face of baseball, flashy, already got his big deal, but he's just kind of checking his guy. Sometimes you need that. I got it, like on our show. Sometimes I got to check Fur has to check me. It is what it is. Like, that's just how they interact. But, I think definitely an underwhelming season. Blake Snell wasn't good. When you get a guy like Blake Snell and he underwhelms, like, I think everybody also thought, me included, that when they traded for all these guys and signed these guys, that, like, we were thinking of them at the top of their game performers, whereas realistically, not everyone's going to be at the top of their game every time out. And it just so happened that people underwhelmed, and that's kind of how the season played out for them. As exciting as they were to watch, it was just an underwhelming season as a whole for them.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of ironic recently when Manny Machado told Fernando Tatis, it's not all about you. And I was talking to my dad about this recently too. When Manny Machado said, hustling is overrated and all that, I was like, you know what, that's going to come back and bite you. And it eventually did, especially with Tatis. But I just thought it was really ironic what happened. It was kind of like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I think Tatis is doing basically what Machado did a few years ago. But I mean, I was just surprised by how they unraveled. And of course, Tatis is getting injured. He's missed a lot of games, but he's most likely going to win the MVP. But speaking of Tatis, do you think he still wins the NL MVP despite not making the playoffs?
We actually had this discussion on our last episode. I think he's probably going to win it. However, I would give it to Bryce Harper if I was giving out an MVP. Like, you've got other guys in there. Like, we like to make fun of this may be mean, but we refer to, like, the big numbers guys as, like, the sabermetric guys as, like, baseball nerds, and it is what it is. And some people out there are saying, like, Adam Duvall and his power numbers are going to win, and I'm like, okay, listen, the dude's hitting .071. So what if he had 40 home runs? Tatis obviously is flashy, has the numbers and everything, but I think from what Bryce has done with the way he's gotten Philly into the discussion. When we recorded, they were 2.5 back to the wild card when we put out our last episode. We were talking about this, so to even have them within, like, spitting distance of pushing for a wild card, he's hitting over 300. We went as so far as to say, like, Bryce Harper is underrated since he signed his new deal, because I just don't think he's getting enough respect as being one of the best hitters and the most dangerous hitters in baseball. And I think, like, for what he's doing with the Phillies, it's pretty remarkable, and I would give it to him. I don't know if everyone agrees with me. I don't think he's going to get it. I don't think he has enough statistical backing on that. I mean, he's hitting over 300. He's got 30 bombs, but he only had something like 77 RBIs, and everybody loves the big three. Tatis has more runs driven in and all that big type of stuff. So I think from a stats standpoint, he doesn't deserve it, but I would give it to him because I enjoy the eye test as well. Like, if you watch the games, you see the impact. He's getting hits in big moments. He's hitting big home runs. Like, he's not hitting home runs down 7-1 or up 7-1 for that matter. He's hitting home runs to put them ahead and tie the game. And that's what is taking into account for me, because he's doing it all, it's September. It's down the stretch. We're trying to make the playoffs, and that's when he's doing it. So that's what I find most impressive about what he's doing right now.
And yeah, I think the MVP race has been really interesting in the NL, because I think if Jacob deGrom would have been healthy the full season, he probably would have won the MVP. And I think the AL, I think Ohtani is going to easily win it. But if he doesn't end up winning the MVP, which again I think he's going to, and say Bryce Harper wins it, that would mean that both the MVPs in both leagues didn't make the playoffs. Do you think really making the playoffs, because I know it's pretty big in the NBA and it's pretty big in the NFL, but it seems not to be that big in the MLB. If you don't make the playoffs, you can still win the MVP. Do you think that really matters about making the playoffs?
Yeah, in the MLB, I don't think it does. I think it should have some sort of merit, but I'm just basing this off of what we've seen. I mean, like Mike Trout has an MVP year every year when he's healthy. Let's just be real. Yeah. But he's won MVPs and the Angels have won 70 games. Like, they didn't even sniff the playoffs. Like, I mean, what he does is special, but it's you have to take into account too, like on the other side of that, how much can one person affect a baseball game? Like, Mike Trout could theoretically go out there and break every hitting record in the history of baseball by going 4 for 4 every game with doubles, home runs. He could hit 1,000. And if his pitching sucks, which the Angels don't have good pitching, they never have. They drafted 20 pitchers this year, and it's probably not going to work out for him again. Like, they could still only win 80 games, no matter what he's doing. These could all be solo shots. They could lose every game 5-4, So, like, one player, it's so tough because even one player in football can have such a big effect on a game. You look at most of the MVPs, basically a quarterback award, and who's got the ball the most, who's distributing the ball is the most. That's who it is. We look at the NBA, one person can take over a game, without a doubt. In the MLB, you don't get that. So I think you have to kind of look at individual performances too, but I think the playoffs and who's willing your team, down the stretch should matter a little bit more than it has, just because, I really do believe that even in baseball, like I said, when you're coming up with big hits and if you're coming up in big spots day in and day out, like, you play baseball every day. Like, these guys are playing every day. If you're doing this every day and putting your team ahead and winning games for your guys, like, that needs to be accounted for. Even if you just start looking at slash lines down the stretch, like if your 2 MVP contenders are right here, and who's played better in September, like who put them in a better position to win, and that's how I would start edging out MVP awards, because it's an important award. Like, this is, I mean, I'm sure dudes got this in their contract for more money. You win an MVP award, you get a nice little $500,000 bonus. Like, that would be nice, but instead my team won 60 games and I didn't get anything. So I don't know. That, to me, I think the playoff should have some sort of grasp on who wins it.
Yeah, and again, with baseball too, it's basically you can have a great hitting team, but if you don't have pitching, you're not going to go far. I mean, you look at the Giants, who won the World Series in 2010, 2012, and 2014. Their pitching was outstanding, and their hitting wasn't the greatest, but their pitching was great, and their hitting eventually got really hot in the postseason. So that's kind of what it boils down to. If we go to the American League side of things, it's been kind of crazy the way it started. The Astros have had another great season, even though people thought they would fall off. But if you look at the AL East, where it's most interesting with Tampa, Boston, and New York, who do you think comes out of that division, wins it? And who do you think, or let me rephrase that, who do you think wins the division, and who do you think falls out of the playoffs of those 3 teams?
So I want to say that Tampa clinched the playoff, or clinched the division already, I believe. So yeah, I believe they did. As far as I'm concerned, that's got obviously one of the strongest divisions in baseball, minus the Orioles, who may have set a record for lowest wins this year. But like, I don't know, Boston is one of those teams where they were playing. I looked like they were almost destined to push Tampa Bay, and they started fading over the last couple of months, and now they're, all 3 of those teams are within basically a couple games or so for the wild card and trying to make a wild card. I think Boston's got the number 1 spot, and then you have New York and Toronto kind of at a half game. I would love to see Toronto in there, just because playoff baseball is in Toronto. Like, you can't beat that crowd is electric. Part of me thinks I think the Yankees are going to somehow hold on and get a wild card spot, and it's going to upset me. But yeah, I think the Yankees kind of hold on there and just edge out, just because I don't know if that lineup gets any sort of hot, like it's over with. Like, that lineup is they've never ever been all healthy and good at the same time, and they're all somewhat healthy. And I think after like trading for a left-handed bat like Rizzo, and different things like that. I think they can figure it out over the last, handful of games or so over the last week here. And I think they edge out the Blue Jays for that final spot.
Yeah, looking at the AL East, I forgot how good the division was. Again, outside the Orioles, who were just terrible. But yeah, but if you look, you forget about I always forget about the Blue Jays, and and I think last year they played all their games in Buffalo. Then this year, half of the season they played in Buffalo. So to see them doing well, even though they didn't play in their home stadium half the season, I don't even know if they can still have full capacity yet.
Yeah,
but it's that's good for them. They've done a great job, and of course the Rays have been excellent. It seems like even when people think they're going to fall off, they have a great season. And, another ownership doesn't like to spend money. When they traded away Blake Snell, I thought that was a terrible idea, but it seems not to matter because of how good they are. Then, of course, the Astros, everybody thinks they're going to fall off, but they just don't. Did you expect Houston to have this good of a season as they are right now?
I think people kind of forgot about how good Houston actually was. And I don't mean that in like I knew they were going to be, this team. But like, if you look at the division, nobody thought Seattle would be good, I don't think. And they are at least competitive good. The A's are always generally good. The A's are a lot like Tampa Bay, where they kind of just like, they go out and they bring in a guy like Elvis Andrus, who is getting paid, $14-15 million at 32 years old, and you want to slot him in because you have a hole at shortstop, when realistically you could have just found almost anybody else. They have a couple of young guys, but it's worked for them. They go trade for a Starling Marte. They trade a young arm in Jesus Luzardo, and the A's are always kind of in like win mode too. And it just just the way their franchise, it kind of works for them. So I think people kind of I thought Oakland would be good. Before the season, I did pick Houston to win the division because like the lineup is still really good. Like they, minus all the cheating stuff, which by now we should all be over, and all that different stuff. Like they just have a lineup of professional hitters, and they develop talent like really, really well. Like when they bring up guys to contribute from the minors, they contribute right away. Like whether it's pitching, they just have a stable of arms. And I mean, it's almost to the point of where now, like you have to applaud the organization. Nobody's going to because of the whole cheating thing. But when you have like a culture and like basically just a tradition of like knowing how you're going to develop guys, I think that's kind of their sauce. And I also think they play with a massive chip on their shoulder. Like I think that they are kind of out to prove. Like I forget, was it last year when Correa got up in the press conference and was like clowning the media and all I forget exactly what he said, but he basically said something of like, oh yeah, like look who's cheering now after they won their wild card game and they got swept the next round or something like that, which was hilarious. But like they all have their chip on their shoulder. Like I think they're out to prove that, they can win without it. And they're a dangerous team. Like when they get hot, they can swing it with the best of them. They can go out there and they can win a 2-0 ball game. Like it's nobody's business. They play, above average defense. They have speed. They have power all the way through the lineup. Yordan Alvarez might be one of the best, probably one of the best pure hitters in the league from the left side when it comes to power, hitting to all fields. He's kind of a liability. He's a DH. If you had to put him in the field, like, good luck. But I think they're just a pretty complete baseball team. And that's like what you want going into October. And they've put themselves in good position, to win the division and play some October baseball. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if they made some noise, going deep into the postseason this year.
Yeah, I would agree totally. So let's shift over to the NL, and I kind of mentioned I would talk about the Cardinals, but at the time of this recording, they now have won 12 straight. The Brewers have already clinched a playoff berth, but they haven't clinched the NL Central yet. Who do you think? Do you think the Brewers end up holding on and winning that division, or what's the whole outlook you think in the NL Central?
Well, I'm trying to look here. How far are they back?
I think they're about 8 games. I'm pretty sure it's 8 games.
Yeah. So here we go. 7.5 games. Okay. And they're playing a series against the Brewers right now. Are they not?
Yeah. They just got the sweep though. So they won 4 games. So I think it was, they got the sweep. So I think the Brewers are probably going to win the division. I think they were just, that's a tough lead to overcome within a week. And I don't think like
that's necessarily like bad, either. I don't think that's obviously the wild card game against the Dodgers isn't, super exciting for you as a Cardinals fan, but I think for them, their focus just needs to be making the playoffs. And like when you go on a run like that, when you win 12 straight, it's going to at some point end. Like even all the streaks come to an end. So at some point there's going to be, especially in baseball, where you run into a team that just beats you that day, and that's okay. And I think the point of it is you have to manage like how you respond to that. And if you do come into the playoffs, do you want to go in on coming off of a streak, and then now do you start if you let some games slip, now you've lost 3 or 4 in a row, and you still get in, but it's like no, we need to make sure that our heads are right, and like we're in the right headspace to go into the playoffs and go win a game and move to the next round. If I was the Cardinals, I would be looking at this like this is a playoffs right here. Like every series is a playoff series. That's the way I'd be looking at it. Like one game at a time, win today, push to tomorrow type thing, because that's a hell of a run to get into it. And then now you just want to make sure you stay in it, and then you're ready to go. You're healthy, you're rested, you're ready to go. But it's going to be interesting. We got a lot of good matchups here, especially the wild card game. I love the wild card.
Yeah.
Like don't get me wrong. I love that whole aspect of everything of the wild card. So I'm a big fan. And I think I honestly, I don't want to ever really say somebody matches up with the Dodgers per se, but I think a hot Cardinals team is one of the most lethal teams in baseball. So like you don't want to catch them when they're hot. You don't want to catch them on a 12-game winning streak. God forbid they go into the playoffs not losing. Like Jesus Christ, they might win the whole thing. So that would be bad for me as a Cubs fan. That would be tough to see. But I think they match up pretty well, and I think they've been doing it. And that's another team that's got a lot of culture there. So It's a good team to make some noise in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I thought when we lost Flaherty, the season was done, and we were really struggling. We were just mediocre at best, and we kept on winning, losing. We have a 2-game winning streak here, then we lose 4 straight. Or we have 3 games, we win, and we lose 3 more. It was just kind of like we couldn't stay from that. We were just mediocre, to be honest. And I think Wainwright has had a solid year, and John Lester, we traded for him. He really started to struggle. Now he's done really well. Yeah. What do you think the huge difference was for the Cardinals? Why do you think they've been able to have such a big winning streak, even without their best player in Jack Flaherty?
I think part of it is guys just like is just stepping up. Like you said, you go get a guy like John Lester, who had a bad end of the season of his Cubs career, really, like numbers wise, like not because it was a problem or anything like that. But then he goes to the Nationals, and the Nationals were just kind of hoping for the best, and they flip him to the Cardinals. And I think the Cardinals they got a new person plugging and playing every day. I don't know, this is for me because I don't watch them every day, but there's a new guy creating headaches for me every time they play the Cubs, because it used to be like Tommy Edman was like a pain in the ass. And then when Tommy Pham, like years ago, broke into the big leagues, like he was this 28-year-old rookie that could hit the ball 450 feet, and then he was fast and all kinds of this stuff. I think they're a team like outside of their star power. Obviously, you have Arenado, you have Paul DeYoung, you have Paul Goldschmidt, you have Yachty, who's been there forever, who's still doing it well. I think they are able to put like role players and players that just fit what they do well. Like they do that almost better than anybody. And I think that's part of the reason why they're a strong organization, is because you look at I'm a Cubs fan, so I'll use the Cubs for example, right? Like we just went through what was probably the best 5-year stretch in Cubs baseball history. And now I'm sitting here like, well, hopefully we get another one. Whereas as a Cardinals fan, you kind of have to look at it like, you just trust the process, and eventually you'll be there again. And I think that's what the Cardinals do really well, is they're able to just find players that fit the mold. They play like they play good baseball, they play good defense, they pitch well down the stretch. And what better guys to have down the stretch than like an Adam Wainwright, who's been around, who's won championships, who does it, who's poised out there, and a guy like John Lester, who's one of the best postseason pitchers of all time. Like both of those guys are. What better guys to have, and then you just and to have down the stretch for you to make a push and to get into the playoffs. And once you're there, like all bets are off. It's a new season basically, you know? So I think that's what propels them to win, is because they do all the little things right, and they're able to find guys that maybe other teams may have discarded. They play the waiver, wire well. They sign free agents well. They're able to find guys on team friendly deals, and they bring them up through the system. And here they are contributing in September when a guy like Jack Flaherty can get hurt. So.
Yeah, and I think you're right too. And again, they've done a great job with their minor league system. And of course, the veterans in both Wainwright and Molina have been great this year. Then, of course, Tyler O'Neill has been excellent this year. That's
another guy who I was thinking of. Tyler O'Neill hits 200 every year. Then out of nowhere, he remembered how to play baseball, and here we are this year.
Yeah, he's been great. And then, of course, Sosa coming off the bench, he's been great as well. We just have a lot of guys, and lately they've done a better job in free agency where they've spent for guys like trading for Arenado, or I think I can't remember if they either signed or I think they traded for Goldsmith and extended him. And they did a few other things, but those were great matchups. And the bullpen hasn't been the best, but it's gotten a lot better this year. And I still think the Cardinals need to go in the offseason and get a better bullpen and maybe another starting pitcher. But I mean, with the way they've done now, it's just been great. And if we can just hold on, I don't mind making the divisionals or making the wild card round, because I don't think we're going to win the division with how good the Brewers have been.
Yeah.
But if we can just hold on and do what we've been doing now, there's a great chance we can at least make the NLCS, but we'll see what happens. There's still a lot of baseball left to be played. Before we kind of end the interview, and again, thanks for coming on. But if you want to, the NL East has been just terrible. Like the way it's been this year with the Braves, Phillies, and Mets. The Mets are kind of out of it now, but the division has just been horrible. Why do you think it's just not been good this year?
The Braves were super underwhelming. I picked them to win the World Series. So that's tough for me. That's a tough look for me. I promise you, I actually know when I'm not going to say I know what I'm talking about, because that sets me up for a lot of shit. But I promise you that I do watch baseball. However, yeah, the Braves have been super underwhelming. And the other thing I think too is, like, I didn't think Philadelphia was that good anyway. Like they don't have it. Like we had he produces Paul Hembekides. He produces Get Up on ESPN, and he came on our show, and he sat up there and he's prefaced it as a hot take, but he told me how good of a seat Zach Eflin was going to be the next, like, Jacob deGrom Shane Bieber, and how he just comes out of nowhere, and like I think he was doing it just because he actually had some, like, numbers to support it, but I don't know. They just don't have enough. Like, Philadelphia just doesn't have enough. And, like, I think they rely too much on their core players that they have. Like, they rely too much on a Rhys Hoskins who's never healthy. They rely too much on a Bryce Harper who has played really well. Like, they rely too much on a Gene Segura who's just not producing like he was when he was 28 years old. And that pitching rotation, like, Aaron Nola can only pitch, one time every 5 days. So, and the bullpen hasn't been good either. So, I think Philadelphia was just never gonna be there. I think New York, like, are the Mets really ever? Like, I'm not gonna pick them really until they do anything. So, like, I don't think anyone really expected anything out of the Mets. Like, they went for it, they tried, it just didn't work out. I think part of it becomes they were celebrating winning. They were practicing the World Series celebration in spring training. I think that doomed their season before it even started. Like, then it got caught on camera was the worst thing, is someone videotaped it and put it on Twitter. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it was just when you have like a division like that, though, like Acuna getting hurt obviously doesn't help. But when you have, like, for the Braves, like, when you have a division like that where everyone is kind of just underwhelming, you just beat up on each other. Like, if you look at the wins, like, Atlanta's got 80 wins, Philadelphia's got 78, New York's got 73, and then you got Miami and Washington down there with 64 and 63. But I mean, like, relatively speaking, it's not like, they just beat up on each other, and then it takes a toll. By the end of the season, you look up and, the winner of the season is going to have 85 wins or something like that. I really thought Atlanta was going to be really good, though. I was upset that they weren't, because I think they play an exciting brand of baseball. But too, that goes back to, like, we were banking on all their stars being healthy, all of their stars playing, like, like superstars. And like, it's really, in baseball, it's really hard to do that year in and year out. But I mean, hey, if they win the division and they get in, you never know, they're a team that they still play good baseball. They're still strong. They still got good ball players on that team. I think, as far as like timely hitting goes, Atlanta, going back to like last year, if you look at their postseason performance, you look at their regular season performance, like they were up there in like a top 10 of like most like walk-off wins. So they're a clutch team as it is. So why would I think another team that I wouldn't be surprised that if they get in and they make some noise, it's kind of like, okay, like they limped to the finish line, but they got there and like now it's kind of ready to play. But missing your stars and getting regression from some of your pitching staff, that hurts a little bit.
Well, you mentioned your World Series prediction, the Braves. That was actually a good prediction. It just, they were last year, one game away from making the World Series, and they blew that lead to the Dodgers. And, of course, the Mets this offseason, they did so much. They brought in Lindor. They already had a good young Pete Alonso. They already had some great pitchers with Jacob deGrom, but it just seems like they underwhelmed, and maybe just because it's the Mets. And I mean, we'll see what they do this offseason, because I feel like Steve Cohen's going to try to do something again this offseason. And of course, the Phillies, it's just kind of like, you feel like it's only really Bryce Harper for them. But the Braves was a good pick, because a lot of people were very high on them, along with the Dodgers and Padres before the season started. So I can't really blame you, because I think I also had the Braves winning that division. But again, one game away from the World Series. They started off really hot, and then they kind of slowed down, and they're finally picking up now. But I mean, that division's just been not great, to say.
They've been bad, and like I really liked like their pitching. Like I really almost liked everything about like what they had going on. Like I expected Mike Soroka to come back a little bit at some point and pitch down the stretch. I remember saying that too. I remember being like, yo, if he comes back, like people are going to be in trouble, because like people forget he's like 22, 23. He might be like 24, but regardless, he's sub 25. And when he's good, he's one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. They had Max Fried, Ian Anderson is still, I think he's still classified as a rookie. So like, he's still a guy out there that like could have been, and then you have it anchored by like a Charlie Morton, who's they just gave an extension to for 2 years, who's going to be around for another 2 years. So like on top of that, they had a pretty decent back of the bullpen. You had some questions in there, but I don't know. I thought they kind of had that it factor too. It seemed like coming into the year, like where they kind of had like the sauce, almost, you could say, where you just felt like they were a team that was going to go out there and win, and it just didn't happen, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen in the playoffs, and once you're in, anything can happen, but I mean, there's still a lot of baseball left to be played. So again, thanks for coming on. This is pretty much my last question, but every time I have someone that has a baseball podcast come on, I kind of ask them if they have a World Series prediction. For the most part, I've gotten what I expected, but what do you think about, or who's your World Series prediction if you had to predict one today?
Right now, I'm a Cubs fan, so this pains me to say, but the White Sox look really good.
Yeah.
They look really good. I think they're probably one of the most complete teams, if not the most complete team in baseball. I would say probably the White Sox, just because that's tough. That starting staff is like, it's no joke. And then like we're talking about leaving Dallas Keuchel off the playoff roster here, and I know he's been bad. He hasn't been good, but like that's a guy like theoretically you'd want on the hill, or in the postseason. Like that's what they brought him in for. So you got to go through Lance Lynn, you got to go through Lucas Giolito, you got to go through Dylan Cease, Carlos Rodon, who was non-tendered and now is a Cy Young candidate type guy. I think he's in all reality, they got to go 5 innings. Then you hand over the ball to the bullpen. You got Kopech, you got Kimbrel, you got Liam Hendricks. God forbid you got a lefty. You got Aaron Bummer coming out of the bullpen. Like, good luck. And they're going to score 4 runs a game, 5 runs a game. So I would pick the White Sox. Part of me, because I just want them to get their one World Series out of the way, so then we can move on to the dismantling of their window, and they can trade everybody, and then they can feel the pain that I feel when the Cubs traded everybody. But for now, I'm picking the White Sox.
And then on the NL, who would you predict? Would it probably be the Giants or the Dodgers, or maybe even like a Brewers team? Or
I don't know if I would take the Brewers. You got the two horsemen up there. They play really good defense, and in the playoffs, that's kind of what comes to fruition is pitching, defense, bullpen. This craze of like offense that everybody is so fanatical about is, it's fun. I love it. Like I get it. It makes sense. But in the postseason every year, the people that play defense, that pitch well are the ones that win the World Series. So I don't know. I'm gonna pick the Dodgers. We're gonna get a White Sox Dodgers World Series, and they're gonna come out of the wild card. And I think it's gonna be an entertaining World Series too, because at least we're gonna get some warm weather games. Like it's not gonna be freezing up here in Chicago, or it will be, so we can go down to LA. But I think that's kind of a matchup that everybody wants to see, but B, I think the Dodgers are just gonna be too tough, especially since they've been, ever since the moves that they made at the deadline. You don't want to see a Max Scherzer on the hill after you saw Walker Buehler the night before, type thing like that. So that's going to be tough, but it's going to be a good World Series if that's what happens.
Yeah. I don't know if I really have a prediction. I would probably just settle on the Giants and Rays maybe, or even the Giants and I'd probably would settle on the Giants, Rays. White Sox is actually a pretty good prediction as well. I mean, Lance Lynn has had a great season. I'm still, still pissed off that the Cardinals a few years ago let Lance Lynn walk, but I mean, he's been a great pitcher. So the White Sox would be a good prediction as well, and that would be interesting to see what happens there. Tony La Russa, I didn't think he was a bad hire. I mean, when he got hired, everybody was all up on, the White Sox. Why did they hire La Russa? But he's been solid, so we'll see what ends up happening. But again, as I've been mentioning before, we've still got a lot of baseball season left to be played. So, and again, thanks for coming on. Is there anything else you want to add before we end the interview?
No, I mean, I appreciate you having me on. I will take this moment to shamelessly plug. Just go check out the show, man, at the Yipps Pod and all social media. We're the Yipps Baseball Podcast, pretty much on every anywhere you can listen to a podcast. That's where we're at. So I appreciate you coming on. It was good to talk some baseball, and yeah, hopefully we can do this again soon.
All right. Yep. Again, don't forget to check out the Yipps Baseball Podcast. All the links of his podcast will be down in the description below. All right. Thanks for coming on, and have a wonderful day.
Appreciate it. You're the man. Thank you.